I answer the phone. Skagit 911, what is your emergency? The date is September 23rd, 2016. A frantic woman tells me that a man just ran into the mall with a rifle. This was the first call our center received of an active shooter. As I looked up, I saw that our phone lines were jammed as we received report after report of a man chasing people and shooting. We talked to survivors hiding throughout the mall that night. One in particular had locked herself in a break room. When the police knocked, announcing who they were, she remained silent. She thought it was the shooter trying to trick her out of hiding. Receiving no response, the police moved on to find other survivors. Once they had left, she reached out to the only people she could trust, my partners and I at 911. You see, we're the only one victims believe we are who we say we are. We reassured her that that was our search team, redirected the team back to her, and got her to safety. We helped get a lot of people home safely that night. This is what people think of when they think of an emergency. But that was not only the biggest tragedy of these people's lives, it was the biggest event of my nearly 9-year career. It is estimated that each year in the United States, 240 million calls are made to 911. That's 635,000 calls each day. Only a fraction of those calls are emergencies of this caliber. Sure, there are still a good number of CPR, motor vehicle accidents, robberies, domestic violence, house fires, and the list goes on and on and on. But there are calls that don't fit in this mold either. There are calls that you or I may not perceive as an emergency, but to the person experiencing it, is the end of the world. By recognizing that, we better equip ourselves to sufficiently respond and prevent further crisis. Again, I answer the phone. Skagit 911, what is your emergency? I hear there's fog on the freeway. Now I have two options. One, I can say, yes, that's what happens when water vapor in the air cools and condenses into tiny water droplets suspended in the air, and that in fact, she's driving through a cloud. Or I can tell her, yes, it is quite foggy today. Please remember your defensive driving tactics. Much to the appreciation of my supervisor, I told her the latter. But why? Why did I do this? You see, a crisis is an incredibly personal event. At that moment, at that location, this woman was very concerned about her safety and for those around her. And it's her crisis I needed to address. I didn't always think this way. When I first got to 911, I used to get very, very annoyed when people would call 911 for things that I felt were not an emergency. And then I took this class in college that changed my outlook on life forever. It was called the theory of theater. I know. Our professor proposed a very simple question to us. He said, what is art? We all had answers. It's art, right? We said poetry and literature and music and painting and theater. And then he stopped us and he said, art is anything that moves a person. I didn't think much of it then, and then I went to work. Again, I answer the phone. Skagit 911, what is the emergency? I hear, hi. It was one of our regulars. We'll call him Paul. Paul is a developmentally disabled adult. He calls us at all hours of the night and day. I really wish I could tell you I'm a bigger person and that his calls did not annoy me. But Paul's calls were never emergencies. Nothing was on fire, no one was being shot at, there was no emergency. I still provided Paul with professional courtesy, ensured that once again there was no emergency, and then said, "Hey Paul, gotta go, phones are ringing." He goes, "Bye, tell the boys to stay safe." He ends every call that way. And then my coworkers started to tease me for lying to him. You see, our lines weren't ringing. I just didn't want to be on the phone with Paul, and it's not an emergency anymore. This went on for a while, and then one of my coworkers said that it was really sad that he didn't have any friends or family in the area. And then he has a caretaker, but she's really only there for a few hours a day and just mainly does housework. All of a sudden, the full force of that art question punched me right in the face. If art is anything that moves a person, then crisis is anything that scares a person. Here's Paul. It's late at night. He wakes up alone in his apartment. He can't call his mom. He can't call his friends. His caretaker won't be there for 4 or 5 more hours. So who does he reach out to? 911. We are always there, and we always answer the phone. Paul's crisis, it may not be life or death, but it is still a crisis to Paul. He is alone and needs some sort of human contact. Once I understood that, I was no longer annoyed by his phone calls. And the next time he called, I did chat with him. He's actually a really funny guy. And he's helped us stop a number of crimes. He's reported vehicle prowls, people stealing from donation bins, and others smashing change boxes at car washes. Now, did he do this because I chatted with him? No, I'm not that egotistical. Kinda. But he did it because he's a super person. You see, it's these simple connections, it's these community connections that make the communities we live in a better place to be. When no one answers the phone, we feel more alone in those communities. Empathy in my job is not that soul-connecting, walk a mile in their shoes sort of empathy. No, I'm waist deep in crisis every day. If I were to do that, I would be emotionally crushed in a shift, maybe 2. No, in my job, empathy is simply acknowledging that an event is causing this person to seek help. Once I accept that fact, I am now in a much better place to help that person, no matter how small their event might appear. In 2016, our center answered roughly 250,000 calls. Of those calls, 130,000 of them required some sort of police, fire, or paramedic response. Skagit County has a population of 120,000 people. That means that on average, each citizen is going to call 911 twice and have need for emergency responders once. While every crisis deserves the utmost empathy, it's not always easy when you talk to as many people as I do. Again, I answer the phone. Skagit 911, what is your emergency? It's an elderly male who's concerned about an unattended candle he can see a few blocks away. For whatever reason it is, on that day, I could not grasp why this gentleman was so concerned about that candle. I am, however, still a professional, so I requested the fire department check on that house. When they arrived, they found the entire back porch on fire. I was not providing that citizen with the empathy he deserved. I did, however, still do my basic job, and that's the only reason the fire department saved that house that day. I think about that call every single day. How I almost allowed someone's house to be destroyed. How, by not providing that gentleman with the empathy he deserved, I automatically put myself at a disadvantage. The idea of empathy or a crisis being personal was new to me when my professor inspired it all those years ago. But think about it. How many times have you ever heard somebody complain about their job, their spouse, their sibling, their parents, lottery tickets, politics, favorite sports teams, cats, dogs, planes, trains, and even automobiles? And do you think, is this really the worst thing you have in your life? No, it probably isn't. But for whatever myriad of unseen reasons that you don't know about, it's being pushed to the top of the list. And I believe it's responsibility of each and every one of us to have empathy for that person. So, how have these experiences made me a better person, not just an excellent dispatcher? Excellent. My nephew lives with my wife and I. He's developmentally delayed, he suffers from PTSD, and he has a seizure disorder caused by a brain malformation that has roughly 17 consonants and 14 vowels. The best way to describe him is a nonverbal autistic child on the development level of a 4 or 5-year-old. This means it's very, very difficult for him to express his basic wants, needs, and concerns when they arise. You know that twinge of hunger, that uncomfortable feeling in your stomach you get when your body tells you it's time to eat? Well, for him, that's very, very hard to recognize and to express. So he does what any other 4 or 5-year-old does. He acts out. And I will admit, it is extremely difficult for me to tell the difference between a behavior problem and an internal crisis. But I have to acknowledge that his art is different from my art. So I take a very deep breath and I say, what do you need? Do you want an orange? I will generally get enough of a response to know what action to take next to mitigate his internal crisis. By taking that moment to provide him with just that little bit of empathy, to reach out to him, I've managed to prevent a simple, hungry child problem from becoming a full-blown temper tantrum, which would happen if I only address his behavior issue. Listen, there are plenty of conflicting views in this world, and the reason we have a hard time listening to each other is because we have a hard time acknowledging that everyone's views exist. In my job, I am confronted with everything that makes me uncomfortable on a daily basis. But I have to push that aside, have a little bit of empathy for that person, and proceed with listening and assisting them. The art that is making them seek help may be something that I, as a cisgendered, able-bodied, heterosexual, middle-class, white, and I hate to admit middle-aged, Christian male could ever understand. But if my experience has taught me anything, it's that I should trust their personal definition of a crisis. Once I do that, I am now ready to answer the phone when they call. So, next time you're in a crisis, call me. You know my number.